How's it going, everyone? This is Pete from the Lasser Cast, where every so often we get a chance to interview horror writers. And I am super excited today to be talking to Lucas Amon, who is the screenwriter and director and also novelist that's going to be joining us today. He just wrote this beautiful book called Warmth, which I had the chance to read, and we're going to be discussing that today. I wanted to make sure I pronounced your name right. It's Lucas Amon, right?
Yes, and you may be the only person in my life that has ever guessed it right without having heard it first.
Okay, well, I did hear it first. I heard it right from the mouth of Doug Bradley.
Oh, right
So
on.
he pronounced it right. Yeah. So Lucas's book, which was put out by Encyclopocalypse, the audiobook also came out. They are really great about putting out audiobooks. And his book was narrated by Pinhead himself, Doug Bradley. So that's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, that was a thrill for sure. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been a lifelong fan of his and of Hellraiser, so I was pumped to have him.
Yeah. What's that like, just like finding out that he's going to be the narrator of your first novel?
I mean, it was insane. Mark's the publisher. Mark was talking about getting him, uh, pursuing him, and they have a relationship, have had for many years. So I thought it'd be amazing if you could. I was just sort of crossing my fingers, hoping for the best, but not expecting much. And then Doug came back to us and said he loved the book and wanted to do it. And I thought it'd be just absolutely insane to have him, and it was. I mean, the work he did on it is just beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. It's so funny because you hear it all in his, narration with his British accent, and it sounds beautiful. Because a lot of your writing, I feel like, is very poetic. And then when he would speak as the characters who were American, like they would have that American accent, and he really nailed that teenage boy voice, I thought.
Yes, yeah, he did. Yeah, he really did, and he nailed the moments of humor with them. I think too. Listening to it, I was often giggling at some of the character quirks he put in. Yeah, I mean, I think that was a discussion early on, and a concern of his was, he felt like the book was very American, and was concerned somewhat about his accent. But I thought actually, I mean, personally, I don't really think much about accents beyond like, there's the first few seconds you hear it, and then you're used to it, and then I no longer register it. But
Right.
maybe that's not the same with everybody.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought anyway, it would be nice to have his sort of elegance,
Yes.
um, not accent aside for the narration. And then he had decided that he thought maybe not go full American with the accents of the boys, but just to sort of step a little bit into kind of a more American sort of place,
Yeah.
at least away from his British accent to a degree. I think it worked very well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point you make about how eloquently he speaks because what I said before with your story, and also I think we should kind of talk about the plot, but I didn't want to spoil the story for anyone, anyone who hasn't read it yet. But essentially, there is a very fantastic element to your story. And when the main characters go into this sort of fantastic world, I feel like the actual prose changes a bit. Like when they're just in the real world, I feel like the prose is more just sort of common or the way you'd kind of expect like teenage characters to think. But then once they go into this fantastic area, I felt it got a lot more poetic. Was that intentional on
Cool.
your part?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a degree. I mean, I think some of that is when I'm writing is going on um, in the background. It's a sort of a subconscious process of
Yeah.
just trying to capture like what is the feeling of the moment of the scene.
Yeah.
So when I'm with teens just hanging out, for example, I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious decision that write more sort of spare prose that and shorter sentences and I think actually that's just arising from the feeling of imagining a scene with teenagers, and then going into a scene in the cave in the fantasy world. I'm probably conjuring a little bit my love of like Ballard or some of these writers, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering, like, specifically in those cave scenes, like, which authors sort of really inspired you? Because I felt like the language in there was, like, a lot more rich than what I'm kinda used to reading myself, and especially, like, in horror itself. Was there specific authors that inspired you? You mentioned Ballard. Was there
Yeah,
anyone else?
for sure him, and specifically, I would say Crystal World. You know, I think like the specificity of his descriptions in that would really plant you in that space. And I think like the particular sort of details he would highlight that could allow you to then fill out the rest. That's he was a big influence in that sense. Um, I don't know if I had anybody else specifically in mind. I mean, I think certainly Clive Barker has been
Mhm,
a lifelong influence of mine, and I think there's probably a taste of Weave World in some
mhm,
of the fantasy here.
mhm.
Um, I was, you know, I had also this. This may not be as obvious, but I had like Something Wicked. This way comes,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Bradbury?
big time in my mind, and that was a huge reason why I decided to go with a narrator instead of going first person with the boys. You know, so that
Yeah.
you could feel, so you could sort of step out of their perspective and watch them from a little bit more knowing adult space.
Right, right. Yeah, I can understand that. Absolutely. Yeah. I've kind of danced around the subject of the book and like what happens. If you want to kind of explain it to our viewers, without spoiling it, how would you basically pitch it to them?
Yeah, well, it's about three boys, teen boys. One of them kills himself at the creek where they go to smoke and drink, and his blood like fertilizes the mud and grows these caverns underground that are full of uh, almost like plant-like uh, growths of his memories and other sort of totems, items of significance from his mind that are towards the surface a little more chaotic. They're sort of growing over each other, but the deeper you go into these caves, you get sort of fully formed memories looping in chambers. And so the other boys, especially one that had a romance that was cut short with the boy that killed himself, take to these caves to deal with their grief. They're exploring, in a sense, for an answer why he's done this, but also as a way to continue their relationship with him, to continue being close to him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so well done. One of the things that I love so much about it is that you essentially have created this like tangible environment that the characters interact with and pass through, and you've made like memories and emotions tangible. And I
Yeah.
think that go ahead.
No, oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was a huge part of the what if that drove me to write this. It was, you know, I started writing it initially after my dad passed, and I would have dreams of him where I got to hug him again,
Yeah,
and that sort of feeling of, you know, wishing that that could be real and actually physical once you
yeah,
wake up, I think was a big part of it. And he was an artist, so you know, looking at his surreal, a lot of it was very surreal sort of landscapes, looking at these sort of pictures and imagining that they could be physical spaces you could travel into and explore. You know, I
yeah,
think that was really the genesis of the concept was, what if this was tangible? What if it could be?
yeah. There are certain, like, I guess maybe often like films that kind of remind me of the subject matter versus books. When it comes to just my exposure to fantasy and horror, I know like a lot more about like film and TV versus literature.
Yeah.
But I think of like what dreams may come. You know, the Matheson book.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Just what you said about your father, and then sort of like wanting to go into his artwork. That sort of reminds me of the adaptation of What Dreams May Come.
Oh,
And Robin
sure.
Williams.
Yeah.
You know,
So, some of the interesting sort of like the dyes with the flowers and yeah.
right.
Yes,
And
for
then another example I could think of, or essentially two, is like I think of like either like Inception or Westworld, where it's like they're these sort of like worlds that you enter into, and they're in like a loop, and you experience characters, but they kind of say the same things over and over again because they're
yeah.
like on a loop, you know, and you're walking through it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Fritz Lieber has a book too called yeah, You're All Alone, something alone, where this character is like the world is performing a script in a sense, and that something happens to this character and breaks him out of the script, and now the world continues performing as it should have
Right.
in his absence, but he's not there to do his part, and he's sort of walking around this space. I've always found that kind of interesting. Characters with some sort of limited conscious life, or maybe a conscious life that's happening in another dimension that you're a part of, so that you're seeing it as like a stage play or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I referenced movies, and I know that that is a major thing for you too. Like movies are a big part of your career, right? Like that's
Yes,
essentially mainly what you've done, right? This is your first novel,
correct.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've got 10 years of trying to pursue doing features with some really cool companies. It's been fun, and it's been frustrating.
Sure.
So the first feature hasn't come to be yet either, even though that has been sort of the longer pursuit and the main pursuit. But yeah, I mean, I've always been a lover of film and of novels, and I paint as well. I think that all of these interests sort of fuel each other.
Yeah. Did you make the artwork for the cover of this book?
Yes.
Oh, it is so good.
Thank you
So
so
good.
much. I
I
really
love it.
appreciate that. Thank
It
you.
it really like it like automatically put me into this world. Like just looking at the
Excellent.
cover, I could kind of get a feeling. I think I know what this is going to be like, and then it sort of became that, you know. And then so then
Great.
you made the commercial, the trailer that's on your website too, right?
Yes.
Okay, that is so cool. And it has the shark at the very end too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
Yeah.
kind of hoping what it would do is not so much inform the way people saw the cave once they got into it, but maybe kind of start to uh, offer a suggestion to what it could look like, to just sort of get people thinking in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I think that like, you know, Encyclopocalypse, when they were promoting this, they were saying that it is their first young adult novel. And I think that when I go in the bookstore and I see young adult covers, I don't really see anything that looks like the artwork for Warmth on the
Cool.
shelf. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I feel like it's very unique and it stands out. And so when they so like did you go to Encyclopocalypse and pitch this story? Did they have a relationship with you and like said, what do you have? Like how did that work out?
Yeah. So Mark, who's the publisher, used to run Clive Barker's company. He and I met at a Spectre Vision event. Spectre Vision is Elijah Wood's horror production company, and they were producers on what was meant to be my first feature. And so I've known him for probably about 7 years ish now.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about doing various things together. This idea did start as a feature idea. It started as a screenplay, which he
Okay.
read. I think probably that many years ago,
Yeah.
um, and he was a big fan of it, big supporter of it, and
Yeah.
I think I had various ideas that he was always suggesting. Why don't you do this as a novel? And it was always on my mind to do a book eventually. Anyway, my mom's a novelist, so it was something that I always imagined I would try at some point.
Yeah.
Uh, this one, now I'm not sure why this one this one called out for me to tackle it first, except that it was one of my most personal and favorite screenplays, and one that I thought would be the most impossible to get going as a film.
Right, right.
But one that I thought could work really well as a novel.
Yes.
And so he and I had many coffees early on before I started, where he would say, "Yeah, just do it. Why don't you do it?"
Yeah.
He was very encouraging. So he was there from the start, pushing me to get into it.
Yeah, and you said it was very personal. I know that you mentioned that your father had passed away, and that sort of inspired this story in
Yeah.
general. The three boys that you mentioned at the beginning, the main characters of the story, Ethan, Pete, and Fox. I was wondering, are they all kind of an aspect of you? Are you kind of primarily like Fox?
I mean, I think there are aspects of me in all of them.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know which I would say. I think probably maybe there's more me in Ethan than in Fox, although I
Okay.
think probably quite a bit in Fox. But I think all of these characters are taking taking bits of my friends that I loved as a teenager. So
Yeah.
they're all composites of my friends, really, more even than they are me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think none really one to one with any particular friends I had. Although Pete is pretty close to my friend Nick, so I think there are other personalities in there, but he's pretty close. The other two boys, I think, are more of a hodgepodge of my various friends.
Yeah. I think that up until the moment where the one character commits suicide,
Hmm.
um, I feel like it was a very like it really brought me back to when I was a teenager. And I'm 40 now, but it reminded me of when I was a teenager. That like just
Cool.
them coming together. Yeah, yeah, just like going to the stream and in the woods, and just the way they would talk to each other and the way they would interact. Once the suicide happens, things kind of become more heightened and dramatic, and so it's more serious. But that sort of that feeling, I thought it really captured that teenage essence.
Great. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted it to be. I wanted those scenes to feel as real as I could possibly manage, so that we had this grounding in a very real feeling world when it was sort of upended with this fantasy element.
yeah, yeah. You mentioned the idea of it being like real difficult to adapt this or maybe to get it greenlit or whatever into a movie.
Hmm.
Um, I was going to say that I watched a short film that you made called Peopling, and I,
Yes.
I found it on YouTube, but I know that it's also on Dust, right? That's sort of like a streaming channel.
Yeah, on their sister network called Alter. So Dust is kind of more
Oh,
sci-fi focused, and Alter is more horror focused. It's same company, but yeah.
okay. Right, right. And Alter is where I did a little bit of research on you too. And so I had a couple of questions based on that film.
Okay.
And hopefully my film ignorance doesn't show too much. But like, would you label Peopling as like a surreal film, or would you put it in some kind of other genre?
Sure, I think it would be fair to call it a surrealist film. I think it maybe has slightly too too concrete a narrative to be a truly surrealist film. I mean, I think
Okay.
it's surrealist in the sense that its logic is a little dreamlike and its conceit is a little dreamlike. But I think for it to be truly surrealist, I think you have to do away with any logic in narrative. And I think this has maybe a little too concrete a narrative to be truly surrealist.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay. Because like one of the things that there's like a page that's about you on the Alter website, and there's all
Oh, I
these
didn't know that.
well, yeah, yeah. Well, there's these interesting questions. Like, I don't know who interviewed you because it didn't really reference the interviewer, but
Hmm.
like they asked you like if you could pick like Stephen King or Lovecraft, who would you pick? And do
Hmm.
you remember that interview?
So, vaguely, yes.
Vaguely. But they asked you at one point if you could make a team of horror movie villains who would be
Uh-huh.
on your team, and then you mentioned the creature Elmer from Brain Dead,
Sure. Yes.
right? Right. And so
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, do you feel like your film is or short film is similar to that kind of movie, like Brain Gas?
That was more what I had in mind. You know, I
Yeah,
had when I was making Peopling, you know, I think that the particular influences that were shining through there were Frank Henenlotter,
right.
John Waters.
Yeah,
You know, and I was pushing more in a comedy direction with it for sure.
yeah. So is that like are those two guys like are they considered like horror comedy? Or, I mean, maybe not. What's to say, John Waters, but
Hmm.
like dark comedy. Is that the idea?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think that would be fair for both of them. I mean, Frank Henenlotter considers himself an exploitation filmmaker. You know, that's my understanding from his interviews. Uh,
yeah,
and I think, and really, I mean, I don't know what John Waters. I haven't heard him refer to his work, but you know, that's how he started too. You know, that I mean, he kind of started the midnight shows with his films,
yeah,
so, and kind of created the whole exploitation circuit. I think, yeah, I mean, both of those guys, especially with like um, John Waters' Desperate Living, you know, I think we're just sort of into pushing boundaries
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and making people uncomfortable in
Right,
a way that didn't take itself very seriously.
right.
You know, I think, and that's not always what I'm looking to do. You know, Warmth, I think, it takes itself very seriously, but peopling was a whole different thing, and that was, and I just wanted to have fun with it. You know, like they did with their films.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Warmth seems very personal, and then like Peopling did seem kind of like, it was like kind of like you were like taking a risk with kind of how bizarre it was, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think there's something very brave about that to like put a film like that. I mean, because the very first, like the credits in the very beginning, it looks like semen kind of dropping, right?
Yes.
And
Right. Yes.
and it's just like, oh, buckle up. What are we in for right now? And
Yeah.
I like when you make something like that. Are you like what's the intention behind it? Is it that like I want to show this to people that are like me, or is it like I'm putting this out there to kind of see what kind of response I'm going to get? Like, because obviously it takes like a lot of effort, money, time to make a movie,
Yeah.
and to make something like that. I think it's a very like bold and brave choice.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't often have, um, I don't have, this will sound false, but I think it's mostly true. I don't often think of what the reaction's going to be when I'm creating something,
okay,
except for my own. I'm often thinking about like, how would I react to this? But,
yeah,
um, so I don't know if I had any sort of conscious, sort of reasoning behind pursuing that idea,
yeah,
in terms of like what I wanted it to do to an audience necessarily, except
gotcha,
certain scenes very specifically I wanted to get a laugh.
right,
Um, you know, I will say that after it was released, the most exciting thing to me was the people that were not the audience for it, who were exposed to it and had big reactions to it.
yeah,
So this short blew up on Alter, and it's got like 33 million views. Part of that is that for whatever reason on Facebook, people started sharing it, tagging their friends, tagging
yeah,
friends to freak them out or gross them out,
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. But tagging people that were not the kind of people that would be into it to
right,
get the
right, right,
biggest reactions.
yeah.
So seeing those big reactions was really, I think, the biggest pleasure of it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, yeah, yeah. So essentially, like when you're making a film, when you're making a short like that, it's like you just have the idea and you envision it, and it's not like I don't care who's gonna see it. It's just like I want to see how I could essentially make this.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
very
just for
cool.
the pleasure of the making, really.
That is awesome. Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, you have an actress from Twin Peaks in it. You have Kimmy Robertson, right, in
Yeah.
the short. And
Yes.
is David Lynch any kind of influence on you at all, or?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he's my favorite. Yeah, big
Oh,
time.
okay, okay,
Yes.
okay.
I'm sure it probably shows through sometimes a little too much, but yeah, huge influence. I
Okay.
I discovered him, I think, when I was about 12, maybe 13, with Lost Highway,
Oh, okay.
which I think is woven now into my creative DNA. And
Yeah.
saw shortly afterwards, my sister got me Eraserhead for my birthday. I think my
Hmm.
13th birthday. Um, and that even more so. Eraserhead, I think, is far and away the best film ever made.
Mm.
And I think that's in most things I do.
Yeah, I listened to Lynch's, like, it wasn't like an autobiography, but um it was like a essentially the audiobook version of it was like him giving his perspective on things, and then there was like a recollection of his film career. I forget the heck it's called too, but it's this book that's on Lynch and his films. Um but I was thinking about that when I watched Peopling, and when I was doing research on you, because like um you know, he always talks about like ideas just kind of coming to him, almost like you're going fishing and you catch those ideas, you
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
And then when you were talking about like making Peopling, I was just kind of thinking about when he talked about making Eraserhead. So it kind of makes sense, like what you just said, kind of
Yeah.
ties in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I do tend to think of creativity in a similar way to him.
Yeah.
Although I think like the metaphor I would use is a little bit more like pregnancy, and that
Uh,
the ideas are a little bit more like sperms that get inside you, you know?
yeah. Well, that just fits with Peopling just perfectly, right?
Yeah.
And warmth too, kind of with the cave itself too. I kind of feel like that applies there too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like the life force going into the cave essentially.
Yeah.
So let's see. I had a whole bunch of questions for you though too. Let's see. On your altar page in that interview, there is that question. This is what I was kind of curious about. This, they asked you about Stephen King and Lovecraft, and you said neither. Like, because the question was like Stephen King or Lovecraft, and you said neither.
Yeah.
And then you said Dennis Cooper,
Oh
whose
yeah.
work I'm not familiar with at all, but it said that he has the George Miles cycle, which seems like
Hmm.
very personal essays. And so, like, was that an inspiration for Warmth as well?
Yeah, I think maybe not directly, but Dennis Cooper is a writer I admire a lot. Maybe my favorite writer. I don't know. Certainly in my top five. And I was
Yeah.
reading a lot of him at the time. I think in the space of like 3 or 4 months, I devoured everything he'd written, and I think that was about the time probably I gave that interview. Um, I think one of the things he does is he creates very very believable teams and gives them um, very intense things to deal with. And I think that was, that's what I was sort of talking about earlier when I said I wanted to create sort of a realism that the fantasy could sort of flower from.
Hmm.
There's no fantasy in Dennis Cooper's work, but there is sort of extreme brutality, and I think it feels to me more intense for the realism of the teen characters. Uh,
Mm.
and I think it probably why I brought it up for the answer of that question is that like his writing is darker, more intense, more horrific than anything in an actual horror novel. Uh,
Mm, mhm, mhm.
now, I didn't when I said neither. Also, I wasn't meaning that necessarily as a slight to Stephen King
Sure.
uh, or Lovecraft, because especially with Stephen King, there are things I admire
Right.
and certain books I admire, but neither are a particular influence on me. And if we're going sort of cosmic horror, uh, I much prefer William Hope Hodgson to Lovecraft.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. I kind of even got that vibe when I was reading it. I was like, I don't think that you're just like dismissing those two. It's just that like this guy you'd rather go to, you know, to
Yeah.
Dennis Cooper. In that same interview too, they ask you about how do you prepare for your films, and you mentioned that you make sketches and paintings, and then you mentioned these things called lookbooks.
Oh,
And
sure. Yeah.
I didn't know what a lookbook was. What is that?
Oh, lookbooks just like ripped imagery from, excuse me, from films, from photographers, from artists, whoever. It's basically making collages of imagery that where you take these things that exist and sort of put them together in a way that suggests what this new thing will be, what the feel of it will be. Um, So and they're fairly common for pitching films,
Sure,
and
sure.
and for pitching, for music videos or commercials or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's an important part of the process early on. I'll do it. I'll start putting together these collages even before I start writing. So I get an idea of like it's myself. What is the flavor of the thing? I want to. I think I need to know the flavor before I get into it, and that's a good way. Making playlists is another good way.
Oh yeah.
I think anything that helps me get a specific handle on what the feel of the thing is before I get into it. And so it's important to my process early on, not just to show the work later.
Yeah. Did the playlist for Warmth have like the first 2 Nine Inch Nails albums on it? Songs from that?
You know what? I think like I do adore the first 2 Nine Inch Nails albums, and I'm sure they were on sometimes when I was writing. But largely I was looking for music that mixed an organic feel with an intense sort of brooding vibe,
okay.
so that you have either like very literally sometimes sort of elements of nature, of found sound, or otherwise acoustic instruments, something that felt a little more earthy. I think getting away from some of the very synthetic stuff I normally listen to, just to sort of feel a little bit more grounded in nature as I was writing.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I got, I can pull up some of it right now while we're talking. I've got one.
Sure. Yeah.
Are you a big music fan?
I mean, I appreciate music of all different genres, that's for sure. And I just thought it was funny because there are a couple of criticisms that Fox makes of music in Warmth. And I was like, oh, is this your opinion on these bands or whatever?
Yes, probably so. You brought up his criticism of Trent Reznor's work. Certainly that is my feeling, is that the first 2 Nine Inch Nails albums are amazing, and I've been uninterested in everything since.
Right.
Not to be too cruel on him, but he doesn't need my praise. Everybody loves him.
Yeah, take that, Trent Reznor and Lovecraft. You guys get enough attention.
Yeah, I think like as an industrial fan, I've always had sort of a chip on my shoulder too for their popularity. And I think most industrial fans will probably agree, Skinny Puppy should have had that love. Skinny Puppy is far and away the best industrial band.
Oh, well, see, there's my ignorance again too, because like as far as industrial goes, what I can think of is, and I might be wrong about this, but like Nine Inch Nails, but then like KMFDM and like Ministry, are those
Sure.
like those are industrial as well? And like is Prodigy industrial too?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make that case.
Yeah.
I think they sort of they at least had a sort of a leg in that arena. I think they come from a little bit more sort of like dance sort of, and they started with their 2 singers were initially dancers on stage. Okay. They come from sort of like a more of like the rave culture, and all of that. I'm ignorant on what all of the subgenres are in that sort of electronica space. There are millions of them. I don't know what they are. So, Prodigy, I'm sure, occupies a few very specific ones. I don't know what they are, but I certainly wouldn't argue with anybody that made the case they were industrial for sure.
Well, now you're making me want to like listen to some industrial music.
Yeah, well, I think you certainly should, and if you hadn't heard Skinny Puppy, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I don't think I can even name a Skinny Puppy song.
What do you like? More abrasive, aggressive music, or do you like?
Kinda. I think that like if I told you my bands that I like, you'd probably be like, "Oh, it's kind of lame." But like I like like Deftones and like.
Oh, Deftones are great. I love Deftones.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah. And
Team
then like,
Sleep, I think, was a pretty big influence for the writing of Warmth.
oh, okay. That's awesome. I could see that. Yeah. Okay. And then like, just like I like metal bands like Mastodon and Ghost isn't metal, but I
Sure.
like Ghost and
Yeah.
yeah. But it's funny. I was gonna say that like you it said in the interview that you made commercials and music videos in Austin, Texas. Do you still live in the Austin, Texas area?
No, I live in California, in West Hollywood. I've been in California for 8 years, 7 years, something like that.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I haven't lived in Austin for quite a while. I did live in Austin for 10 years. I grew up in Houston.
Oh,
So I
okay.
still feel, like a Texan. I don't think that really leaves you. And
Yeah.
I found myself often homesick for Austin for the first many years I lived here, but Austin changes so rapidly. I mean, it was changing while I lived there, and the span I lived there,
Yeah.
uh, it was not the same place I left that it was when I arrived. But I think when you're living there and it's changing around you, it's a little different than when it's changing in your absence and you return and see it, and it's not the
Right.
same anymore.
Yeah. I live in the suburb of Austin. I live in Cedar Park.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, and I moved to Austin when I was 26, and so that was like 2009, and I lived in New York prior to that for my whole life.
Yeah, that's a
So
big change.
yeah. Well, what's it like living in California versus here?
Uh, um, maybe not so different as you would think. I mean,
Right.
it's I mean, it is a much larger city, but I don't often have to leave my neighborhood. So when I lived in Austin, I lived on South Congress when I left and did a lot
Oh,
of walking. I walked basically everywhere I could
yeah.
to avoid driving, and I do the same here. I think like if you're in a pretty good sort of central spot and you stick to it a little bit, you can have the same sort of intimate city vibe of like Austin, contained to your specific sort of neighborhood. Now I have to get out and drive for meetings and things, but and I'll even walk to the grocery store. Um, so it feels a lot smaller probably than a lot of people's experience of LA.
Oh, okay. And so now that you're there, you're just like working on your film career, right? And just making
Hmm.
movies and films. So you said that you're you know the feature hasn't happened yet. You said.
Hmm.
But is that ultimately what you're working towards at the moment?
Not working on the same feature that I mentioned earlier that I was doing with Spectre Vision. That's on the back burner for now. And actually, I started writing that one as a novel as well. That may be
Oh,
the third novel. Um, so working on trying to get another feature off the ground right now. I just got back day before yesterday from Sitges, where I was pitching it at a co-production market there. And only like a month or so before that, I was at Fantasia, Frontiers pitching it. So we've got a lot of really genuine interest and excitement in this one. It's looking very promising. I'm always sort of hesitant to be too optimistic because you never know what's going to happen, but it's looking pretty good for this one. We'll see.
awesome. Yeah. So, are you allowed to like kind of reveal what type of movie it is or anything like that, or you kind of have to keep the details secret?
I think I could say a little bit about it. Yeah,
Sure.
it's called A Boy Shaped Void. It's a body horror uh, about a STD that tethers people's bodies. It tethers an infector's body with an infectee's body via these spiraled wormholes
Yeah.
um, that become sort of uh, like bodily glory holes in a sense that connect them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and the film becomes, in a sense, a sort of a very strange possession film because the protagonist is this teenager who's been infected by an older man who then has access to his body through these portals.
Whoa. Okay. That sounds kind of awesome, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
gonna be. I think it's gonna be intense, and I think it's gonna be fun and strange, and um, yeah. Well, fingers crossed we get it going. I think it's looking pretty positive.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Because I mean, like, when it comes to like horror and body horror, I think that now the audience is like way more receptive and can appreciate original ideas. Like I feel like horror right now is on like this upswing, and that like it's like you're seeing a lot more inventive stuff just in
Totally.
general.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think people are very uh, have been sort of trending in a direction that's way more accepting um, of art house horror and of far
Yes.
out horror and of anything that's sort of pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
We've sort of shaken off. I can remember, uh, 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, there was always this feeling of like, what is the current trend? Um, Haunted house movies, whatever, and speculation of what is going to be the next trend. And
Right.
I don't think you could even venture to speculate what the next trend is going to be now, because outside of studio filmmaking, studio horror, there really aren't trends
Mm-mm.
anymore. And also, nobody is that interested in these giant tentpole horror films that the studios are putting out anymore, or at least less interested. But I think you hear a lot more excitement for these breakout sort of indie successes in the horror world. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like when you were like on Twitter and there's the whole horror community on there, they're always raving about these smaller horror films versus
yes,
like the big budget things. Like this year I could think of like, Pearl and Barbarian and then X even earlier in the year.
yes,
And I mean, there's tons of even more obscure examples than those, but like those are like kind of the ones that everyone just keeps talking about over and over again.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah. That's
yeah.
cool.
I think it's exciting. I think horror fans like to see something new. They like a little bit of novelty. So I think we'll continue, hopefully, moving even further that direction.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. So speaking of like moving forward, if people were exposed to your stuff just now, like through this interview, what could they go seek out right now to like just learn more about you and just like what do you have upcoming that's coming out?
Yeah. They could take a look at Peopling if they're interested. Very, very different thing than Warmth. Warmth is out as of yesterday, is in the world. So they could take a look at that. Follow me on Instagram to see what I'm doing. A Boy Shaped Void has got most of my focus right now. That's the feature. And it's also, I didn't mention this, but it's also the second novel. It's adapted from my second novel. So that'll be the next thing, at least as a novel coming around the corner, and then hopefully as a film.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, a couple things out there.
yeah. A Boy Shaped Void is going to be another novel coming out from Encyclopocalypse.
I ideally so. Yes, we're starting to talk about that. Yeah, they're looking at it right now, and my agents are as well. So we'll see. But I would love to do it with those guys.
Yeah. Well, Lucas, most of the time when it's writers that come onto the show, I pretty much interview them because I'm the one that reads the books. And
Yeah,
Danny, my co-host, he does all the movie stuff. But I think he would have really enjoyed talking to you as well. And so, like, if A Boy Shaped Void comes out as a movie, I think he'd love to talk to you too with me. And then if
cool.
it comes out as a book from Encyclopocalypse, if you want to come back on, I'd love to talk to you again too in the future.
I would love that. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been an honor.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, thank you so much, and I hope that it moves forward, it gets green lit because I'm looking
Ah,
forward to seeing it as a movie, man.
thank you. Me too. I hope so. We'll
Yeah.
see.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Bye bye.